Boxing has seen brawlers, it has seen technicians, but no one fought quite like Archie Moore, a man who didn't just fight in 4 different decades, he won in 4 different decades. He stood toe-to-toe with Rocky Marciano, he mentored Muhammad Ali, and even trained George Foreman for his own historic comeback. But above all, Archie Moore knocked out 131 men. That's not just impressive, that's a record for knockouts by a world champion, still untouched today. And he didn't do it with brute force alone. He did it with craft, with patience, with old-school knowledge passed down through the trenches of 1,000 rounds. He trained like a professor of pain, mixing brutal physical work with deep mental preparation. He knew how to preserve his body, sharpen his timing, and break down fighters who were younger, stronger, and faster. This is not just a story about training. It's a blueprint for outlasting eras. Welcome to Back to Boxing. Archibald Lee Wright was born in 1913 in the Mississippi Delta, a place and time where life gave black boys like him very few chances. From the start, the odds were stacked high. After the death of his uncle in a tragic accident around 1928, Archie, still just a teenager, drifted toward the streets. He fell in with local gangs, chasing a sense of belonging the world had denied him. One of his first thefts says everything about who Archie Moore really was. He stole 2 oil lamps, not from a stranger, but from his own home. But he didn't do it for thrills. He sold them to buy his first pair of boxing gloves. Even then, something inside him believed boxing might be his way out, his way to fight for more than just survival. Not long after, Archie was caught stealing coins from a streetcar motorman and sentenced to nearly 2 years at Missouri's Boonville Reformatory. For many, that would have been the end of the road. For Archie Moore, it was the beginning. In that reformatory, he found discipline, purpose, and most crucially, he discovered that he could hit, and hit hard. The reformatory's boxing program became his sanctuary. It was the first place where structure replaced chaos. This wasn't just about learning to throw punches, it was about learning how to stand tall when life tried to knock him down. When Archie got out, he was no longer just a troubled kid, he was a fighter. But the boxing world wasn't ready to see it. In the 1930s, it didn't open doors easily for a black man from reform school. So Archie didn't wait for an invitation. That early rejection became fuel. He trained harder, thought smarter, and built a career not by fitting in, but by becoming so good, they couldn't ignore him. He didn't just become a boxer, he became his own system, self-made, self-taught, and endlessly relentless. The unconventional training methods. When Rocky Marciano visited Archie Moore's training camp in the Catskills before Moore's 1955 title shot, he left with serious doubts. "I don't believe he can win," he said. "Making weight will beat him." What Marciano witnessed wasn't just training. It was a punishing ritual of discipline and extremes that defied boxing's conventions. One of Moore's most talked about innovations was his brutal approach to weight management. While others dieted down over time, Moore followed what he called a calculated drop. His system? Shed 1 pound of real weight per day, no guesswork, no shortcuts, until he hit the exact number. Then he'd maintain it through what he called drying out, a tightrope act of dehydration and recovery. A typical day in Moore's camp was a masterclass in discipline. 4:30 a.m., he'd wake up and begin mind conditioning, deep visualization, reviewing fight scenarios, and preparing his mental edge. 5 a.m., roadwork began, but Moore didn't jog. He sprinted in intervals, up hills, across trails, simulating the burst and recover rhythm of a real fight. Back in camp, he'd go straight to the jump rope, snapping out round after round to sharpen his footwork and rhythm before dropping for hundreds of sit-ups to harden his core. 7 a.m., breakfast was exact. Every bite served a purpose. He logged calories and nutrients long before sports science caught on. But what truly set Moore apart was how he trained in front of a mirror. "Do you know a fighter's best friend coming up?" he once asked, pointing to a floor-length mirror. He used it not for vanity, but to hide his punches, a technique he developed obsessively. He'd shadowbox for hours, practicing subtle shifts in his stance to conceal his right hand behind his left shoulder or tuck his left hook with a head tilt and roll. It wasn't just training, it was disguise in motion. After mirror work, he'd move to the speed bag, a blur of leather and rhythm that built his timing, accuracy, and shoulder endurance, then on to the heavy bag or pads to refine combinations. And sometimes, training didn't happen in the gym at all. Moore would head to a local factory and feed heavy wood into a massive burner, hauling and lifting until his arms, back, and grip were burning. It was brutal, functional conditioning disguised as hard labor. Exactly the kind of old-school work that made him durable in the ring. Boxing is based on disciplined training and disciplined repetition, Moore often said. While others chased brute strength or raw speed, he drilled precision. He'd spend entire sessions working a single combination until it flowed as naturally as breathing. This philosophy birthed his signature defense, the lock. A cross-armed guard that looked passive but was built to spring traps. He practiced endlessly to explode from it with counters, all while staying balanced and tight. It wasn't just a stance, it was a system. His sparring was just as deliberate. Moore didn't treat it like a war, he treated it like chess. He'd set challenges for himself. Today, only jabs and counters, or only defense off the ropes. Each partner became a live puzzle to solve, not a body to batter. And while recovery wasn't yet a buzzword in boxing, Moore was ahead of his time. He used hot-cold therapy, dedicated time to stretching and mobility, and insisted on full rest days to let the body catch up with the mind. The result? A fighter who made weight when others broke, who aged like fine steel instead of rusting, and who knocked opponents out not with wild swings, but with cold, calculated strikes. Fighting the boxing Mafia. While Archie Moore was perfecting his craft inside the ring, another fight was quietly threatening to derail his entire career. A fight outside the ropes, against the invisible forces that controlled the sport. In the 1940s and early 1950s, boxing wasn't just a sport. It was a racket, often run by corrupt promoters, mob-connected managers, and rigged commissions. And if you weren't part of their system, you didn't get a seat at the table. Here's a staggering truth. Moore fought for 16 years, 160 professional bouts, before he got his first world title shot. Let that sink in. One of the most accomplished knockout artists in boxing history had to wait over a decade and a half just to be recognized. Part of the delay came from what Moore himself described as crooked or incompetent managers. These weren't just bad contracts, they were schemes that robbed him of money, exposure, and momentum. Managers would take the lion's share of his purse, book him into punishing fights for quick paydays, and offer no long-term vision for his career. In many cases, they were more loyal to the promoters than to Moore himself. And then, of course, there was race. In an era when black fighters were routinely sidelined, Moore faced the same ugly prejudice that haunted so many greats before him. Title shots often went to less talented white fighters with better connections, while Moore, despite an ever-growing resume of brutal knockouts, was quietly passed over again and again. He wasn't just overlooked, he was actively kept out. But Moore didn't fold. He went global. Frustrated with the US boxing scene, he took his career on the road, fighting in Australia, Europe, Cuba, and South America. In places like Sydney and Buenos Aires, he wasn't seen as a threat to the establishment. He was celebrated as a star. Crowds packed arenas to watch him fight. Local papers ran headlines about his power. He was building a global reputation while America looked the other way. These international tours served a bigger purpose. They kept him sharp, expanded his fan base, and most importantly, proved that promoters back home were ignoring a legitimate box office draw. He wasn't just winning abroad, he was electrifying crowds. Moore could have become bitter. Many fighters in his shoes did, but rejection only made him train harder. Every time he was denied a shot, he returned to camp with more urgency. He knew that when his time finally came, he couldn't just win. He had to leave no doubt. He had to be so dominant that even the corrupt couldn't keep him down. By the early 1950s, the wall of silence around Moore began to crack. His record was undeniable. His knockouts were piling up. His global fan base was growing, and newspapers were finally starting to ask the hard questions. Why hasn't Archie Moore been given a title shot? What exactly is the sport afraid of? Fans, especially those overseas, started pushing back. The pressure mounted. The excuses ran dry. Finally, in 1952, just 4 days after his 39th birthday, Moore got the call. a title shot against light heavyweight champion Joey Maxim. The boxing world thought they had waited him out. That age and wear would finally break him, but they were dead wrong. Ring generalship and late career success. When Archie Moore finally got his title shot against Joey Maxim on December 17, 1952, he was 39 years old, an age when most fighters are on their way out. But Moore wasn't like most fighters. Decades of discipline, studying opponents, and grinding through setbacks had turned him into something rare, a rookie champion with the wisdom of a veteran and the punch of a much younger man. His win over Maxim wasn't just a victory, it was proof that smart, structured training could beat age and expectations. Moore didn't rely on speed or raw athleticism. What set him apart was ring generalship, the ability to control the pace, space, and rhythm of a fight. Years of mirror work had sharpened his instincts until he could anticipate moves before they happened. His lock defense looked passive, even lazy to those unfamiliar with it. But it was a trap. Moore would absorb pressure, lull opponents in, then strike with perfect timing. He didn't just hit hard, he hit right. That's why his knockouts often looked effortless. He was catching opponents at the precise moment their guard dropped. While most fighters decline with age, Moore got better. His training gave him the tools to conserve energy, outthink his opponents, and finish fights without wasting movement. Every sparring session was treated like a chess match, each round a chance to test, adapt, and evolve. Even in defeat, like his 1955 bout with Rocky Marciano, Moore showed flashes of brilliance. He dropped Marciano in the second round with a beautifully timed right hand, proving that technique could still rattle even the most relentless brawler. Moore held the light heavyweight title for nearly a decade, not because he was the fastest or strongest, but because his training gave him something more powerful: longevity, precision, and a style built to last. The mentor and teacher. As Moore's fighting career began to wind down, he discovered that all those years of systematic training and self-improvement had prepared him for an equally important role, that of teacher and mentor. But this wasn't just about passing on boxing techniques. Moore had developed something much more valuable: a complete system for developing young people. Moore created what he called the ABC method, a comprehensive approach to training young fighters that went far beyond boxing techniques. The ABC stood for his holistic philosophy. Any boy can succeed if given proper guidance, structure, and opportunity. This wasn't just a catchy slogan, it was a complete methodology based on everything Moore had learned during his own journey from reform school to world champion. Over the course of his post-fighting career, Moore personally trained over 600 young men using his ABC methods. These weren't just boxing lessons, they were life lessons. Moore understood that the discipline, persistence, and systematic approach that had made him a champion could transform any young person willing to commit to the process. In 1968, Moore's ABC Foundation received the Freedom Foundation's Patriotism Award, a special citation for providing a challenge for youth to become contributing members of their communities. This recognition wasn't for Moore's boxing achievements, it was for his ability to take the principles he had learned through training and apply them to creating better citizens. Moore's teaching method was built around the same principle that had made him a great fighter. Boxing is based on disciplined training and disciplined repetition. He would tell his young students that success in any field required the same systematic approach he had used in the ring. Many of the young men who came to Moore were facing the same challenges he had encountered in his youth: broken homes, limited opportunities, and the temptation of street life. Moore's training program provided something these young men desperately needed: structure, discipline, and a clear path forward. Just as Moore had used mirrors to perfect his boxing technique, he taught his students to engage in honest self-reflection. He would challenge them to look at themselves critically, identify their weaknesses, and systematically work to improve them. While boxing was the vehicle, Moore's real goal was teaching life skills. His students learned punctuality, respect, persistence, and most importantly, the belief that they could overcome any obstacle through systematic effort and proper preparation. Many of Moore's students went on to successful careers, not just in boxing, but in business, education, and public service. They carried forward the principles he had taught them, that success comes through disciplined preparation, that setbacks are opportunities to improve, and that age or background don't determine your ultimate potential. The legacy of 131 knockouts. When we talk about Archie Moore's legacy, most people begin with the number 131 official knockouts across a career that lasted nearly 3 decades. But those knockouts were more than statistics. They were the product of a life built on discipline, precision, and relentless preparation. Moore is ranked number 4 on the Ring magazine's list of the 100 greatest punchers of all time, but his true genius wasn't raw power. It was precision. Every knockout came from perfect timing, expert positioning, and the ability to think 3 moves ahead. Moore didn't just hit hard, he hit smart. While most fighters burn out by their mid-30s, Moore was just getting started. He won the world title at 39 and continued competing into his late 40s. That longevity wasn't luck or genetics. It was the result of a training philosophy decades ahead of its time. He emphasized weight management, technical repetition, mental strength, and recovery, things we now consider cutting-edge sports science. But his influence went beyond boxing. In an era of racial segregation, Moore forced the boxing world to recognize black excellence on a global stage. His international tours and his eventual world title were symbolic victories, proof that talent couldn't be silenced forever. So the next time someone says you're too old, too late, or too inexperienced, remember Archie Moore. He didn't just knock out 131 opponents, he knocked out every excuse that stops people from chasing excellence. The blueprint is there. The question is, are you willing to follow it? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into how Archie Moore trained to destroy 131 opponents. Let me know in the comments. What surprised you the most about his training or mindset? I'll see you in the next one.